In 1964, a 12-year-old girl walked away from a friend's house in Elmira, New York, and was never seen alive again. Her name was Mary Theresa Simpson. She was carrying a library book she had promised to return the following morning. Police searched for weeks, found almost nothing, and the case went cold within a year. For 6 decades, her family had no answers, no justice, and no one in prison. Then, in the spring of 2026, forensic scientists matched microscopic DNA evidence preserved in a cardboard evidence box for over 60 years to a man who had been dead for 11 years. The killer had escaped justice his entire life. What he could not escape was his own family tree. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This case deserves witnesses. The year 1964 did not feel like a dangerous time to be a child in a mid-sized American city. The Beatles had just landed in New York. The Civil Rights Act had just been signed. There was a particular kind of post-war confidence still settled over neighborhoods like the one Mary Theresa Simpson grew up in, a sense that things were getting better, that the hard part was behind everyone. Children walked to school alone. Children stayed out until the streetlights came on. Parents did not yet live with the specific fear that would define later decades. Mary Theresa Simpson was 12 years old that autumn. She lived with her parents and 2 younger siblings on a quiet residential block in Elmira, in the southern tier of New York State, a working-class city bisected by the Chemung River, known then mostly for its manufacturing plants and for being the burial place of Mark Twain. Mary was in 7th grade at a local Catholic school. She had recently made the honor roll. She kept a list of every book she had ever read tucked into the back of her bedroom dresser drawer. And the list, according to her sister Patricia, already had over 40 titles on it by the time she was 12. She had told her mother that October that she wanted to be a librarian or maybe a teacher. She had not yet decided. On the afternoon of October 14th, 1964, Mary Theresa left school at 3:15 and walked to the home of her classmate Diane Russo, approximately 6 blocks away. The 2 girls worked on a school project together, a poster about the American Revolution, and Mary stayed for dinner. Diane's mother, Eleanor Russo, later told police she remembered Mary helping clear the dinner plates without being asked. That detail stayed in Eleanor's memory for the rest of her life. Mary left the Russo home at approximately 7:20 in the evening. She had the library book, a copy of Island of the Blue Dolphins, tucked under her left arm. It was a Wednesday. It was not yet fully dark. The walk from the Russo home to the Simpson home was 11 blocks. It passed through a well-lit commercial stretch, then turned onto a residential street lined with maple trees that, in mid-October, would have been at the peak of their color. Mary had walked that route dozens of times. She knew every house. Several neighbors later confirmed they saw a girl matching her description walking south on Walnut Street at approximately 7:25 that evening. One witness, an elderly man named Howard Braley, said he waved to her from his porch. He said she waved back. She never arrived home. Her mother called the Russo household at 8:15. Diane's mother confirmed Mary had left nearly an hour earlier. By 8:30, Mary's father, Raymond Simpson, was in his car driving every street between the 2 houses. By 9 o'clock, he was at the Elmira Police Department. Officers told him to go home and wait, that children sometimes went to a friend's house without telling anyone, that she would likely turn up by morning. Raymond Simpson drove home. He sat in a chair by the front door and did not sleep. By the following afternoon, when Mary still had not come home and had not appeared at school, the department opened a formal missing persons investigation. It was already, though no one knew it yet, too late for Mary Theresa to be found alive. Her body was discovered 6 days later by 2 boys cutting through an overgrown lot near the rail yard on the city's south end, approximately 1.5 miles from the route she would have walked. She had been moved there. Investigators determined she had not died at that location. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma. She had also been sexually assaulted. She was still wearing her school clothes. The library book was never recovered. The Elmira Police Department in 1964 was not equipped scientifically, procedurally, or in terms of resources to investigate this kind of case. That is not an accusation. It is a structural fact. There was no centralized violent crimes unit. Detectives worked the case alongside their other active caseload. Forensic science in 1964 meant fingerprints, fiber analysis, and blood typing. DNA, as an investigative tool, was still 20 years away. The concept of a criminal behavioral profile did not exist in any practical form in local law enforcement. Police canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed neighbors, and looked hard at the men with any prior record of offenses against children in Chemung County. They identified several persons of interest in the first 2 weeks. Each was interviewed and cleared or could not be definitively connected to Mary. A composite sketch was produced based on a partial witness description a man seen near Walnut Street that evening, but it was vague enough to match a significant portion of the adult male population of the city. Investigators did collect physical evidence from the scene where Mary's body was found and from the post-mortem examination. That evidence was logged, packaged, and stored. Whether anyone believed it would ever be testable in any meaningful way is unclear. Perhaps they kept it simply because discarding it felt wrong. Within 8 months, the active investigation had largely stalled. Within a year, it was, in the language police departments use for cases with no active leads, cold. Mary Theresa Simpson's file went into storage. Her parents were left with a grave in Holy Sepulchre, cemetery, and a silence from the department that became its own particular kind of cruelty, not intentional, but real. Raymond Simpson made a point of calling the department every year on October 14 for the rest of his life. Every year, there was nothing new to tell him. He died in 1999, 35 years after his daughter, without ever knowing who had killed her. Mary's mother, Catherine Simpson, outlived her husband by 9 years. She kept Mary's room essentially as it was. She kept the list of books in the dresser drawer. She gave interviews to local newspapers on the anniversaries of Mary's disappearance and repeatedly, publicly, asked the department not to close the file permanently. The department never did. Credit belongs there, and it is worth stating plainly. The Elmira Police Department never officially closed Mary Theresa Simpson's case. Her file remained technically active for 6 decades. It was a cold case investigator named Dennis Fahy who became the keeper of that file in the early 2000s. Fahy was not originally from Elmira. He joined the department in 1988, years after the original investigation, and was assigned to review old unsolved cases when the department created a small cold case unit in 2002. He later described his first read of the Simpson file as one of the clearest moments of his career, not because the evidence was good, but because it was so obvious that a 12-year-old girl had been failed by every system that should have protected her, and that no one had ever been made to answer for it. Fahy pushed for the physical evidence to be professionally re-examined using whatever current technology applied. He pushed again after DNA evidence began reshaping cold case investigations in the late 2000s. He pushed a third time in 2019 when he was close to retirement after reading about genetic genealogy solving a decades-old case in a neighboring state. Genetic genealogy is not complicated in its basic idea, even if the laboratory process behind it is precise. Here is what it means in plain terms. Every human being carries DNA that is a blend of their biological parents' DNA, which is itself a blend of their parents' DNA, and so on going back through generations. When investigators have an unknown DNA sample from a crime scene, from biological material on a victim, they can now upload that DNA profile to public genealogy databases where millions of ordinary people have uploaded their own DNA for ancestry research. The unknown sample does not have to match a suspect directly. It only has to match a distant relative as second cousin, a third cousin, and then genealogists begin the patient work of building out family trees until they find a person whose age, sex, and geographic location place them at the intersection of every branch that connects back to the unknown DNA. This is genetic genealogy. It identified the Golden State Killer in 2018. It has since been used to solve over 200 cold cases across the United States. It works because of the genealogy hobbyists, the people who swabbed their cheeks and uploaded their results to databases like GeneMatch or Family Tree DNA simply to find out where their grandparents came from. They did not know they were building an infrastructure that would one day reach back 60 years to answer for what happened to a 12-year-old girl in Elmira, New York. But that is exactly what they built. In 2021, Fahy, by then retired but still consulting informally with the department, connected the Simpson case with a forensic genealogy team. The biological evidence collected in 1964 was sent to a specialized laboratory for DNA extraction. The science required to pull a usable profile from material that old, stored in conditions that were adequate but not optimal, is painstaking. It failed on the first attempt. The laboratory tried a different extraction method. The second attempt produced a partial profile. A third round of processing, conducted in 2022, produced a profile complete enough to upload. The profile went into GeneMatch and Family Tree DNA in late 2022. Within weeks, the genealogists had hits. Not a direct match. The unknown profile did not directly match any single person in the database, but it matched multiple users in ways consistent with a shared common ancestor a few generations back. The genealogists began building trees. Two separate family lines kept converging on the same geographic area, the southern tier of New York State. They narrowed to a specific surname. They narrowed further, eliminating women, eliminating men born after 1955, eliminating men who could be proven to have lived elsewhere in October 1964. One name remained. His name was Gerald Alamoro. He had been born in Elmira in 1938, which made him 26 years old in October 1964. He had worked at a manufacturing plant on the city's south end, close to the rail yard where Mary's body was found. He had no prior convictions. Nothing in his public record would have flagged him. He married in 1967, had 3 children, retired in 2003, and died in 2015 at the age of 76. He had lived his entire adult life in the same city where he killed Mary Theresa Simpson. He attended church. He had grandchildren. Several people who knew him, interviewed by reporters after the case broke publicly in 2026, described him as quiet, as a decent neighbor, as someone you would not look at twice. Investigators needed to confirm the genealogical identification with a direct DNA comparison. Because Morrow was dead, they obtained DNA through legal process from a biological relative, the confirmation method used in several previous posthumous identifications. The comparison was made in early 2026 by a certified forensic laboratory. The DNA from the 1964 evidence matched Gerald Alamoro. The Chemung County District Attorney's Office and the Elmira Police Department held a press conference on March 4, 2026. They named Gerald Alamoro as the individual responsible for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of Mary Theresa Simpson on October 14, 1964. They explained the DNA process in methodical detail. They acknowledged that no prosecution was possible because the identified subject was deceased. They announced that the case was considered solved and that the file was being closed. Mary's sister Patricia Simpson, one of the 2 younger siblings who had grown up in the house with Mary's untouched bedroom, was 70 years old by then. She attended the press conference. She had been told the night before, privately, by Dennis Fahy, who drove to her home in person because he felt she deserved to hear it from someone who had worked the case rather than from a stranger at a podium. Patricia Simpson did not give a long statement. She said that for 61 years, she had wanted to know who, and now she knew. She said she believed her parents knew too, wherever they were. She said the word she kept returning to was not anger, though there was anger, but relief. Relief that Mary had not been forgotten. Relief that the evidence had been kept. Relief that the science had finally caught up to what happened on a Wednesday evening in October, where her sister walked out of a friend's house, carrying a library book, and waved at an old man on his porch, and then was gone. She asked that people remember Mary Theresa Simpson not as a cold case, but as a girl who made honor roll, who kept a list of every book she had ever read, who helped clear the dinner plates without being asked. That is who she was. The case number came later, and it was never the point. Because no trial occurred, there was no sentencing, no conviction, no judge's statement on record. Gerald Alomoro was formally named as the perpetrator of a homicide. The Chemung County DA stated publicly that, had Morrow been alive, the DNA evidence would have supported charges of second-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault under applicable New York state law. He would have faced a mandatory sentence of 25 years to life. He died in 2015 at 76 years old, having never been questioned, never suspected, never made to answer for what he did when he was 26. 3 things this case teaches, and they're worth taking seriously. First, physical evidence must be preserved, no matter how hopeless it seems. The detectives who packaged and stored Mary Simpson's evidence in 1964 could not have known that the science to use it would not exist for another 40 years. They stored anyway. Families of cold case victims should know they have the right to formally request confirmation, in writing, from the relevant law enforcement agency that physical evidence in their loved one's case has been preserved and has not been destroyed. If it has been destroyed, that fact can be documented and pursued through legal advocacy organizations that specialize in cold cases. Ask. Document the answer. Push if the answer is unsatisfactory. Second, genetic genealogy databases only work because ordinary people have added their DNA. Every person who uploads their DNA to a public genealogy database becomes, in a quiet way, part of the infrastructure that solves these cases. That is not a reason to upload DNA. Thoughtlessly, privacy considerations are real and individual. But it is worth understanding that the network of matches that identified Gerald Morrow was built by people who had no idea a 60-year-old murder would ever be part of the equation. Third, the cases that get solved are often the ones that had someone who refused to let them go quiet. Dennis Fahey was retired. He had no obligation to keep pushing. The Elmira Police Department had no legal requirement to fund forensic genealogy work on a 60-year-old case. The reason Mary Theresa Simpson got her answer in 2026, and not or possibly never, is that specific human beings made specific choices not to stop. If you have a cold case in your own family, find the name of the detective currently assigned to the file. Make contact. Be persistent and be respectful. Ask specifically whether the physical evidence has been submitted for genetic genealogy analysis. Ask who in the department is responsible for pursuing that. Names matter. Accountability to a specific person moves cases forward in ways that general advocacy cannot. Mary Theresa Simpson was 12 years old. She wanted to be a librarian or maybe a teacher. She had not yet decided. She deserved 61 more years to figure out, and she did not get them. What she did get, in the end, was the answer her family had been waiting for since the night the streetlights came on and she did not come home. If this case matters to you, share it because cases stay alive when people keep talking about them. And if you know of a cold case that DNA science has not yet touched, leave the name in the comments below. Someone watching this might be the person who finally pushes it forward.